Hey, this is Stephen Pacheco, the host of Trace Evidence, a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and disappearances. Each week, I explore a different unsolved case and take a deep dive into the victim, the events leading up to the crime, every fact we know, every question we're left with, and then a breakdown of the most popular theories revolving around that case. Each Monday, a new episode comes out, and there are more than 80 episodes of mysterious and fascinating cases to catch up on. Some you've heard, and many that you haven't. If you're drawn to deep examinations of some of the most mysterious cases, give Trace Evidence a listen. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcatchers. Visit trace-evidence.com for more information, and I hope you'll join me next week for another unsolved case on the next episode of Trace Evidence.
You're listening to Scene of the Crime, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, and 3 Men and a Mystery. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Last week, we began exploring suspects in the murders of Roger and Rose. In this episode, we continue to wade through the pool of suspects. Now for a man who was considered the prime suspect in the case. This was a man we are calling Danny B. He worked for Globe Union, now Johnson Controls, making batteries. Depending on whom you ask, Rose was either engaged to Danny or had just lived with him for a time. Danny and Rose met in 1979, possibly through Rose's brother-in-law, who worked for the same company. They started dating in November, and he moved in with her in her home in Andrew County. This lasted until late spring or early summer of 1980, when Rose broke it off with him. According to several news articles based on information from Rose's family, Rose kicked him out of the house because of his drug use. However, this was not the whole story. After her murder, several people in Rose's inner circle told detectives about problems Rose was having with Danny. Rondell Robertson, the babysitter's husband who had Rachel when Rose was killed, when asked if he could think of anyone who would have harmed Rose, responded right away, Danny B. He told detectives that Rose had told him and his wife that Danny and 2 other guys had followed Rose home from work a couple of weeks before. Shirley Robertson confirmed this. She said that she and Rose were good friends and she often babysat Rachel. She and her husband were the only ones besides family that Rose ever left the little girl with. She knew that Rose was seeing Roger and that he was married. On the weekend of September 12th, Roger had asked Rose to go to Keokuk, a town in Iowa about 30 miles from Kahoka, with him. Rose left Rachel with her in the late morning of September 10th and gave her 2 phone numbers where she would be able to reach Rose in case of an emergency. Rose's friend and co-worker Susie Moore McCush, interviewed at the Andrew County Sheriff's Office on September 14th, told investigators when asked if she could think of any suspects that Danny B. was capable of harming Rose. Susie said Rose told her that she had broken up with Danny because she did not like the way he treated Rachel. He yelled at her and treated her badly. Another of Rose's close friends, Vicky Ruoff, spoke to Detective Harold Judd on the 14th as well. She told us how this interview came about.
Sunday, I was getting ready to go to church and got a phone call from the St. Joe police that they needed to talk to me. And I'm kind of a skeptical person. I go, okay, yeah, what do you want? Well, we need to talk to you about a friend. And they've been in an accident. And I said, okay, you tell me the name of the friend and I'll let you know if they're a friend. And they said, well, Rose Burkert. And so when I got down to the St. Joe Police Department, they told me that she'd been killed. It was, at first I denied it. I said no. And it was really tough. They wouldn't let my husband go in the room with me. And it was really tough because then came the accusations of, well, did you do it? Were you arguing? And, hey, you just told me my best friend in the world was dead and you're sitting here accusing me of it. It was really tough. I didn't sleep for weeks afterwards because I couldn't believe she was gone.
Vicki told us that after months of Rose avoiding seeing her in person, they had finally been supposed to get together on the night of Saturday the 13th.
We were actually supposed to get together that weekend. And because she was going to be starting nursing classes and be working at the hospital. And so we were supposed to get together that weekend, and I had forgotten about it. And I lived in a very little town north of where she lived. And I drove past the house at night and I saw the lights on and I almost turned around and went back. And I'm glad I didn't because I found out after the fact that it was the police who were at her house. And because I was going to turn around and go back and say, hey, I'm sorry. I totally forgot about tonight. And so she never said one word to me about going out of town because we had plans for that weekend. So I think this came up spur of the moment because they told me that there were detectives from Iowa down at her house already that night. And they were the ones who I would have came in contact with and would have found out that way.
Vicki had a lot of information about Danny. She told detectives that Danny had purchased an engagement ring for Rose in December 1979 when they were living together. Rose told Vicki that she did not feel ready for that kind of commitment with Danny, and it sounds like she was right to have reservations. Rose suspected that Danny was the one leaving notes on her car at work. Here is Vicki.
She was getting letters and phone calls. She told me that they were threatening phone calls and letters. She thought it was Danny because she broke up with him and he didn't want to be split up, but she thought that they were coming from Danny.
Rose told her that when Danny got angry, he would throw things, and she was concerned that he would hurt her or Rachel. She didn't want Danny to touch her daughter. It's unclear whether this means she literally didn't want Danny to touch her child, or whether there is some deeper connotation to the word touch. It is in quotes in Detective Judd's notes. Rose told Vicki that she was afraid Danny would really hurt Rachel, and if he ever tries anything with her, I'll kill him. Vicki said,
I was told he could get very, very, maybe even violent, but I never saw that myself.
Vicki told us that it was unusual for Rose to have left Rachel with the Robertsons that week when she was away.
I think she was afraid that he would just try anything, just try to hurt her in some way. In fact, when she went to Iowa that weekend, she normally would leave Rachel with family or close friends, but Rachel was left with someone we never even heard about because we didn't know where Rachel was after that weekend, after that happened, and she had left her with another couple that she normally never did leave her with, but I figured she left her with them because if someone was out to hurt her, they would not have any idea that that's where Rachel was at.
Rose had even changed the locks to keep Danny out, but it didn't work. Here is Vicki.
She had changed the locks on her door, and he would be still somehow be standing at the end of her bed, foot of her bed at night after she changed the locks on her door. She got pretty afraid of him. She did tell me, though, that when she would change the locks on her door, she says she'd wake up in the middle of the night and she'd said there'd be someone. She would never say, there'd be someone standing at the foot of my bed. And I know one night Danny had gotten in, but then after she changed, she said there's someone standing at the foot of my bed last night. And I'm like, okay, who was it? And she never would say. So I don't know if it was continually Danny all the time or if it was someone else.
Rose was also concerned because Danny had gotten involved in drugs. She told Vicky that his pushers were calling the house looking for him. He had started to attend drug parties and on one occasion had tried to physically force her to go with him. Tammy Berkman also learned about this from Rose.
Danny, and that he did drugs and stuff like that, and she wouldn't have nothing to do with drugs. And, and she wouldn't have wanted him around her daughter either. So she broke up with him.
Tammy feared that drugs could have made Danny do something drastic.
She acted like she was afraid of Danny. And, she was afraid he was going to, be in her house when she got home one night from work. And, she wouldn't know until she got in there. But that's the only person was, him and his friends. And I don't know if some of that was because he had originally wanted to get her back, but I think some of it was maybe he was afraid she would talk about the drug deals and stuff that he did. And I don't think she would have ever done that as long as, she might have done it to get him put in jail to leave her alone, but that never happened. So, she never talked to the cops about it, but I think he might have been on enough drugs that he was paranoid thinking she might.
For her part, Tammy says of Danny,
when I heard that she was killed, he was the first person that came to my mind.
Rose and Danny broke up and Danny moved out in April or May. According to Vicky, Danny was extremely jealous and got upset if he even heard the name of someone Rose had dated in the past. Vicky told us that detectives were rather accusatory in the multiple interviews she gave them, even showing up at her work. She felt that they were implying that Rose was an unchaste woman.
They wanted to make everything be something bad about her that she would do everything, and I made the comment and go, well, I hope I never die and you come check my place out because you're going to think that I'm perverted too and for stupid stuff that you just have laying around. But they wanted to make her out to be, I guess you would say, someone who would sleep around and everything, and she was not like that. That was not her. They just gave me the impression of, well, she got what she deserved, and nobody deserves what she got.
Her final take on Danny.
Oh, I'm not up in the air about that. I mean, it could have been a possibility, probably, I'm sure, if he found out that she was with Roger.
And as we know, Danny did find out Rose was with Roger. Joanna Young, who had known Rose since the 8th grade and was probably Rose's best friend, was interviewed by Detective Judd on the 14th as well. Rose was scheduled to be Joanna's matron of honor at her wedding to Eddie Shelton, and Rose socialized with both Joanna and Eddie. Joanna knew Rose was going to Cahokia with Roger, and she had seen Rose on the Tuesday before she died. She said Rose and Roger had been together for 2 or 3 months and that they saw each other 3 to 4 times a week, often on Roger's lunch break. Roger and Rose had made a plan that Roger would call Rose and tell her where he was staying in Cahokia and firm up plans for her to join him. Joanna had some very damning things to say about Danny B. She told Detective Judd that Rose was scared to death of him. Detective Judd's notes say, quote, about 3 weeks ago, Rose went home and found her house open. Someone had been there, at least 3 people, with 3 types of cigarette butts. Someone followed her partway home this same night. She thought it was Danny and his friends. It looked like Danny's white car with 3 people in it. The car pulled up and then they got out and sat on the hood and she saw that it was Danny. The car pulled into the driveway by the landlords and sat there for a long time. Rose called Joanna when the car was still there. Danny lied to Rose a lot and was on drugs. Danny, Joanna said, would get violent and upset and throw things when the two argued. He was very jealous. Danny confirmed to investigators that he had purchased an engagement ring for Rose and presented it to her at Christmas 1979, but that she was non-committal. Here is Tammy Berkman.
He had gotten her a ring and stuff before she found out all the stuff he was doing. You know, she gave it back, and I know he kept trying to get her to at first nicely to go back with him. And when she refused because of, you know, all his drug stuff, then he just took it to the next level and was stalking her.
Interestingly, Detective Judd's notes on Joanna's interview on the 14th say the engagement ring Rose was wearing was the one that Danny gave her that she didn't give back. Rose's stepmother, Betty Jo Burkert, who lived next door to Rose, told Detective Judd that Danny was, quote, weird and crazy. According to Rose's sister, Kathy Rourke, Danny had sat outside Rose's house in his van, watching her and the comings and goings at the home they had shared. This was backed up by Margie Lowry speaking about Danny.
One time Rosie had said that if anything happened to her, that more than likely it would be Danny, because Danny was doing all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, because she broke up with him. You know, like sitting at the end of the driveway with his friend in this van, you know, and seeing who would go up and down the road. And one time I went to see Rosie, and I did see the van. So I know that that's a fact.
Margie also said that she believes Danny may have slashed Rose's tires at one point. Tammy Berkman also had some pretty disturbing things to say about Danny.
One time she got home and she could see that there was a van down the drive, but there was like a van that went back to her house. And back when she had to drive by it, she said she knew it was one of his friend's van, and so she was scared when she got home because she was scared somebody might have already been in the house, and that she left Rachel out on the back step at the back door and had her scrunched down and told her to not ever, you know, don't move no matter what you hear. You just sit here and you stay real quiet for a moment, and I'll come back get you in a minute. And she went in and checked the house. She knew that he was watching everything she did, parking down the road, you know, trying to use other people's vehicles. So, you know, so she wouldn't recognize it.
A friend of Danny's who was interviewed, Ron Gladman, acknowledged that after Rose and Danny broke up, he and Danny had driven by her house a few times. He also acknowledged that Danny knew about Rose's upcoming trip to Iowa. Clearly, Danny was keeping tabs on Rose. Furthermore, threatening notes were left on her car outside the nursing home she worked at. Here is Tammy Berkman.
I know that he was kind of rough a couple of times with her, as far as what I was told from her. And I knew that he had left notes on her car, or at least she believed that's who was doing it. She worked evenings, so when she would go back out, she would find notes that, you know, was threatening and stuff and on her car. And I know that she was scared when she got home because she did kind of live out in the country.
Tammy told Paul Holes that these notes said things like, "You aren't going to just walk away from me." And according to Tammy, Danny kept coming around and would not take no for an answer. And about a month prior to her murder, Rose had telephoned the St. Joseph Police Department and filed a complaint about her ex, Danny B. She said she was being harassed by him, and she told the officer she spoke with that if she was ever murdered, Danny would be responsible. She even told them about a very disturbing story. Rose had gotten a dog to protect herself and her daughter from her ex. But one day, she found the dog hanging outside her house, strangled to death. There was no evidence that this horrific act was done by Danny, but the implication was there. This story is backed up by Detective Fisher.
She made a report. She was scared of him and everything ever happened to her.
Margie Lowry told us that Danny,
totally possessive and upset about the whole thing, and felt like he had been totally wronged. He ended up moving to Germany because they questioned him time and time again.
She described him as
obsessive and trying to be controlling and, just a clinging vine.
According to one article, Rose was making plans to move because the harassment was so bad. Of further concern was that Danny was aware of her upcoming trip to Iowa. He had been told about this by Laverna Village nursing home employees and friends of Rose, Viola Plummer and Susie Moore McCush. It was not lost on investigators that Rose's address book found in room 260 bore the notation, "Danny left home for good." Background information on Danny in the files tells us the following. Danny had an arrest record from January 1980. This was a result of an automobile accident that Danny had gotten into, where it was discovered that he was driving without a license. He had no record with the St. Joseph PD, the DCI, or with the Missouri State Police. A DCI narrative report indicates that investigators had learned that Danny was, quote, alleged to be slow mentally, and there have been indications that he is sort of a loner and has a temper. He has been alleged to have used marijuana. Witnesses told agents that Danny was very emotional upon learning of Rose's death and that he had talked to several of his brothers for help. Sheriff Rotter sums up why the investigation got bogged down in the Danny B. angle.
This is a guy who was engaged to Rose, and the engagement was called off, and Danny didn't take it well, and by today's terms, we would call him a stalker. He was stalking her. She was well aware of that, and so she tells the local sheriff's office and the Missouri State Police that if anything happens to me, Danny did it. So you have that, and then you have her murder and Roger's murder. So, of course, investigators are going to look at him. It would be incredibly silly not to. It'd be the first place I would look. And unfortunately, at some point, they really did continue to get target locked on it.
Danny has the characteristics that fit the likely profile of the killer, as explained by Paul Holes.
He may have had a relationship with Rose. He could have been a previous boyfriend, or he could have been a stalker, stalking her. And then, of course, he gets pissed when he sees his love interest with this other man.
Danny was interviewed by the Andrew County Sheriff and then re-interviewed by DCI special agents on September 27, 1980, in the presence of his counsel. Danny acknowledged that he had heard approximately a week before Rose was killed that she was going to Iowa and that she was probably going to marry a guy. As for the night of the murders, Danny told investigators that he had been at work from 10 p.m. on Friday, September 12th, until 7 a.m. on Saturday, September 13th. His typical shift was the overnight. If true, this would almost completely rule Danny B. out as a suspect. While he could have left work in St. Joseph's at 7 a.m. and driven the 4 hours up to Williamsburg to kill Roger and Rose, who were not found until 1:15 p.m., it would have been very, very tight. Now, Danny's time cards at Globe Union show that he clocked in on the night of the 12th at 22:50, so 10:50 p.m., and reflect that he worked 8 hours. And Globe Union supervisor William H. Slentz told investigators that employee records indicated that Danny worked on Friday, September 12, 1980, and Saturday, September 13, 1980, on the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. So Danny was likely not the killer. However, we reviewed these time cards, and there is no actual exit time written down on the time card, and the entries are handwritten. What if Danny had clocked in at work and then left and just wrote down 8 hours later or even before he left? It would not be the first time in history that time cards were fudged. Had any witnesses seen him at work that night? The short answer is we don't really know. DCI notes say, quote, no personnel have been interviewed there, as indicating that they personally saw Danny. It should be noted Information made available to the agent indicated that Danny was the only subject working the midnight shift, with the exception of security guard personnel. His supervisor, William Slentz, did see Danny at work the next night, Saturday, September 13th, sitting at the lunchroom table at the beginning of his shift. But according to DCI notes, they were not able to locate anyone who actually saw Danny at work the night of the murders. However, Detective Fisher told us that there was some alibi information pertaining to Danny that was not in the files.
They all pointed at the guy that was dating. He worked out at Johnson Control. It was Globe Union then. They pointed at him, and he lawyered up. But afterwards, I think that lead investigator who went on to be a sheriff from up in Iowa, he ended up getting that guy on a polygraph test. But she made a report. She was scared of him, and everything ever happened to her to look at him. And first thing he did was lawyer up, and of course everybody started looking at him funny. But I think they finally eliminated him on a polygraph test, and they could prove he was in Globe Union that day working on the assembly line. They said there's no way he could have had time to get up there at the southeast corner of Iowa to do the murder. Detective Wright talked to two guys on each side of the assembly line, and they both verified he was at work that day.
And Sheriff Rotter has some more information.
The function that he had at the factory that he worked in was one of two people that performed a certain function depending on what shift you were on, and had he not been there, someone else would have been called in to take his place, and that didn't happen. He was there, he clocked in, people saw him, he was at his job the entire time. Keep in mind, Danny wouldn't even know where Roger and Rose were staying. So somehow, if you want to believe that he did it, he would have had to leave work, he would have had to punch in, let people see him, slip out, drive a few hours to Iowa, find Roger and Rose, not only find where they're at, but find what motel they're at and what room they're in, and then get in, kill them, get back, and still be there to finish up your work. He was working the night this happened. He was working in a factory setting in St. Joe's, Missouri, and that was one of the things that we went through when we went back in 2016 was, did he really have a great alibi? Is his alibi really that solid? Well, the more we found out about it, the more we realized that it is very solid. I have no question whatsoever that Danny did not commit these murders. Danny did talk to us. I got to say, the guy's life has been turned upside down for many years because people suspected that he did this, and I truly believe that he did not.
So we have DCI notes saying that Danny does not have an alibi and no one else was working that night. And then we have a St. Joseph detective who purportedly spoke with two guys who did work that night and saw Danny. It's hard to know what to believe. Vicki Ruoff told us.
From different people I've heard, they wouldn't put it past him to go up there. But I really, truly can't say when it comes down to it, whether he would have gone.
The lack of clarity about this alibi and the belief of everyone the police spoke to that Danny was likely the person responsible for killing Roger and Rose resulted in Danny being on the suspect list for decades. He was the focus of the investigation in large part because he became a scapegoat for all the scary and concerning things that were occurring in Rose's life, even though there may have been little to no connection. For example, Sheriff Rotter told us that rather than Danny killing Rose's dog to terrorize and threaten her,
we were originally told that Danny was likely the one that killed the dog, and the more we talk to people, it's probably just as likely that the dog actually was not murdered, that it was actually just an accident, that it actually hung itself by its collar on a porch. You know, people have this idea that this dog was somehow hanging from the ceiling or something, like it would, had been murdered in that way, and that's really not true. It was apparently the leash was caught up on something on the porch, and the dog accidentally, very likely, strangled itself, and it really has nothing to do with this. But like so many things, it kind of took on a life of its own and became a thing that was related then to these murders. But it's very likely that it has nothing to do with Danny or even the young gentleman who was sort of stalking her for a while. I think the dog is completely unrelated to any of it. I actually talked to one of Rose's relatives who also, helped deal with the dog and knew nothing other than strangled by its own collar.
The specter of the dead dog took on a life of its own, becoming a butchered omen of Rose's impending doom. Danny was requested to submit his fingerprints as part of the follow-up investigation, and he passed a lie detector test about his involvement in the slaying of his ex. And for his part, Sheriff Slockett considers Danny's alibi to be solid. Further, Sheriff Rotter has said that Danny was the focus of tunnel vision for nearly an entire year on the part of investigators. Yet the fact that Rose saw Danny following her and sitting outside her house, that he was violent, that he was extremely jealous, that he was breaking into her home at night, and that he knew that she would be on a weekend tryst in Iowa with her lover, makes us continue to question whether Danny could have been involved, even from afar. If you recall, there was one incident where Rose was convinced that 3 people had been in her home. Based on the 3 different types of cigarette butts that had been found there, she did not smoke. And she told her sisters that she had seen Danny and 2 friends staking out her house from Danny's van. Is it possible that while Danny was at work on that Friday night, 2 of his buddies did his dirty work for him, traveling up to Williamsburg, calling around to the hotels and asking, "Do you have a Burkert?" and then avenging Danny's rejection by Rose? This is all total speculation. But we did give Danny B a chance to address his involvement once and for all, and he declined to participate in this podcast. And Tammy tells us that Danny harassed her in the years following the murders.
Yeah, twice from Danny on the phone. And that's probably because since if they really cleared him, I probably drove the guy crazy because I wouldn't leave him alone. And, he threatened me a few times, and I got a letter in the mail, a long time ago, I could never figure out who it was from or anything. And they just, was telling me to just back off and leave it alone.
There is another person whom we really don't know whether law enforcement looked at extensively for the murders. But based on what we are hearing from Rose's family and the fact that he also knew that Rose and her boyfriend would be in Iowa that weekend, they should have. This is Lyle Tharp. If you recall, Lyle Tharp married Rose's mother, Marjorie, after Marjorie jilted Rose's father, Fred, for Lyle. And according to Rose's siblings, Lyle was violent and abusive. Margie Lowry witnessed one incident where he flew into a rage and held a gun to the head of one of her sisters.
He had tried to kill, pointed a gun at my sister at one time, and if my brother hadn't grabbed the barrel of the gun, he would have killed one of my other sisters. He made a hostile, belligerent, life-threatening situation.
Lyle had a record for cattle theft and, according to Margie, was engaged in other illegal activities that rose above the level of just petty crimes. In other words, he was a pretty rough character. Of interest to investigators was the fact that Lyle and his wife Marjorie were in Iowa when Rose was killed. They were attending a farm equipment auction being held by Lyle's brother. Rose told Margie that their mother Marjorie asked Rose to come by while she was in Iowa. This means that Lyle and Marjorie knew that Rose was coming up to the Amanas. Before her trip, Margie Lowry reminded her sister of an unwritten Burker family rule. If she was going to interact with their mother, she needed to have someone with her to act as a witness and support person. This makes clear exactly how malignant the relationship between Marjorie and Lyle on the one hand and Rose and her siblings on the other hand was. But what would be Lyle's motive for killing Rose? Had Rose found out that Lyle and her mother were engaged in illegal activities, as described to us by Margie Lowry, and threatened to reveal them? Or was there another motive altogether? Christina Tharp, known as Chris, was Rose's half-sister. They shared a mother, Marjorie. You may recall in episode 1, we stated that Chris had married her stepbrother Lyle's son, whom we are calling Kay Tharp. At the time of Rose's murder, a child custody hearing was pending between Chris and her soon-to-be ex-husband, Kay Tharp. DCI notes indicate that Kay Tharp may have believed that Rose was going to testify at this hearing. DCI notes read, quote, investigators had previously learned that this subject, Kay Tharp, may have attempted to molest and sexually abuse Rose when she was 10 years old. Although Margie Lowry could not confirm this story, she said she would not be surprised and that Rose was in contact with Chris Tharp's attorneys via multiple letters during these custody proceedings. It seems a logical leap that these letters addressed the abuse she reportedly suffered at the hands of one of the parties to the proceedings, and that Chris Tharp's attorney was gathering information that would be helpful to his client's bid for custody and damaging to her ex-husband's. Further, Vicky Ruoff told us that she always knew something had happened to Rose earlier in life.
She never talked about it. But I knew something had happened, but she never would come out and say anything.
Could Kay Tharp have wanted retribution against her for these allegations and helped his father exact revenge? One problem with Lyle Tharp as a suspect that we can see, Lyle had only one arm. He lost the other years earlier in some kind of farming accident. It doesn't seem possible that a one-armed killer could have single-handedly beset Roger and Rose, subdued them, and killed them. After all, how would he have ripped up the photos and other items from Roger's wallet? But of course, there were 2 chairs set next to the bed in room 260. Could he have had help, perhaps from his son, Kay Tharp? Again, this is entirely speculation. But Lyle was, and still is, suspected by Rose's family as possibly having been involved in her death, perhaps with the help of his son. Here is Margie.
Our suspects on our side were our stepfather and his son. He and my mother got an attorney, and any time that they asked him in for questioning, of course they took the attorney with them.
Margie says that their mother Marjorie was capable of anything. She even hired a PI to follow Margie after she left home. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot more information about this questionable branch of Rose's family. But the fact that they were in Iowa on the same weekend, they didn't really cooperate with the investigation, they were involved in shady activities, and they had a possible motive, casts a shadow of suspicion on them. Lyle Tharp is now deceased, so we may never have answers as to his involvement. Now we have another member of Rose's family who, if we believe the information given to us by persons close to the investigation, also knew that Rose was going to be in Iowa on September 12th. James Halter, who went by JC, was one of Rose's 3 half-brothers. He lived in Minnesota with his wife at the time Rose was killed. He and his wife Joan, whom we heard from in earlier episodes, had spent a lot of time with Rose. Rose had lived with them when Rachel was born until she could get back on her feet, and had also vacationed with them earlier in the spring of 1980. JC called the St. Joseph Police Department on September 14th and, according to Detective Judd's notes, quote, demanded information about Rose's death. He told Detective Judd he was a traveling salesman, selling greenhouse equipment and supplies for Study's Flowers out of Kansas City. He sold commercial greenhouses in a 4-state region. He said he was calling from the Super 8 Hotel in Ames, Iowa. On the past Friday night, the night Rose had died, he had been on the road for his job and stayed at the Motel 6 in Council Bluffs. This is 218 miles from Williamsburg, where Rose was killed, a 3-hour drive. This means that J.C. Halter was also in Iowa on the night that Roger and Rose were murdered. This is, at the very least, a strange coincidence, considering neither Rose nor J.C. lived in the state. According to J.C.'s wife, Joan, this was for
a greenhouse convention or something that he had to be at, or
maybe, he might have been a displayer or something too. I can't remember, but he was in Iowa.
JC said the last time he saw Rose was 2 weeks earlier when he had stayed over at her house for one night. He told Detective Judd that Rosie, as he called her, had been having trouble with a guy who worked for her landlord. The guy had been peeping in her windows. Any suspicions of JC investigators had were later heightened by the following story. Stay with us here as it becomes a little complex. An investigator on the case was on a plane years later. He sat next to a professor at Iowa State who, upon finding out that the investigator was from the DCI, asked whether they had ever solved the Amana Holiday Inn double murder case. The investigator responded that unfortunately they had not. The professor then told him that he had been with JC on that Friday, September 12, 1980, and JC had mentioned that he was going to visit his sister at Amana Colonies. Here is Detective Fisher.
That IBI guy told me about 6-7 years ago. He called me at work. I don't know if I interviewed this. I can't think of his name. It was her half-brother, and that made more sense to me because of his conduct. And then, of course, that guy, that professor, don't tell nobody about it till 2 years after he's dead. But him going to Iowa that night and said he was going to go see his sister down at Keokuk, and they come back supposedly all crazy, wild-eyed, and wouldn't talk. The next day, he'd asked that guy if he'd seen his sister, and he said, "Well, don't you know she was murdered last night?" And I wonder if I took a statement. I said, I didn't take no statement from him. And he supposedly had a statement. He hadn't seen his half-sister, whatever it was, hadn't seen her for like a month. And then the other thing was he was a horticulturist, and some of the young detectives and stuff, investigators had talked to me. They said, the sheriff told me they used a machete. I said, they used a machete. It was like they thought it was a roofer's hatchet. And then him being a horticulturist, there was this guy that retired teacher down there, Rick Hartigan. He looked up what a mock was. I think it's how it's saying. This mock didn't match what it looked like on that when he wiped that bloody instrument off in the bathroom. And I surely hope they sent that towel in. I know they were saying they was worried about a maid's DNA being on them, but they surely sent that towel in for DNA test. But it gave a perfect replica in that towel of the instrument, the murder instrument. They thought it was a roofer's hatchet. Again, I'm not. But like I say, everybody's saying it was a machete. I seen a machete. A supervisor called me. I can't remember his name. Called me. I was over at the courthouse, and he says, "I'm such and such. I'm a supervisor." He said one of our agents was flying on a plane back from California, and he said that this professor from up in Iowa said, "Did you ever solve that murder case, or the double murder case there at the Keokuk area?" And the young officer, the investigator, IBI, said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Well, let me tell you what I know." And he told a story about this guy coming up from St. Joe, and said he was going to go down and see his half-sister, whatever it is, down at the Keokuk Manor Colonies. And then he said when he come back, he was all wild-eyed and crazy. And the next day, he wouldn't talk that night. And the next day, they said, "Did you ever go see your sister?" And he said, "Don't you know she was murdered last night?"
So a DCI agent had been told by a professor from an Iowa university that he knew JC and that JC had gone somewhere on the night that Rose was killed and come back wild-eyed, and the next day told everyone that his sister had been murdered. This is a very strange story and an unlikely one given the distance between the Amanas and Council Bluffs. But if there is any truth to it, it could explain how the killer accessed Rose's hotel room. Here is Detective Fisher again.
And that could explain why she let the guy in the room too. She was fully clothed, and Roger was in his skivvies.
Rose's friend Vicky seems doubtful that JC could have harmed Rose. She said that the half-siblings had a good relationship and that she and Rose even stayed with JC and his wife Joan at their home when they were schoolgirls.
They had a good relationship because when we were in 8th grade, 9th grade, we would go and spend weekends with her brother JC and Joni. his wife, they had a little store down towards Weston, Missouri, and we go down there and spend time at their store with them, and they had a good relationship. And she was always telling me that if anything had ever happened to her, she wanted JC and Joan to take care of Rachel.
It does not sound as though Rose was concerned at all about JC's character, since she told multiple people that she wanted JC to have Rachel if she were to die. JC was Rachel's godfather after all. And Margie Lowry told us in no uncertain terms that she absolutely does not believe that JC killed Rose and Roger. But she acknowledged that JC had a tendency to act like the moral authority of the family. He had opinions about the life choices his siblings made, and they were not always favorable. Rose's friend, Tammy Berkman, saw this side of JC.
It felt like he wanted to control every aspect of her life. Okay, we had our apartment when she was pregnant, and when it got closer to time for her to deliver her baby, they didn't give her a choice. They made her move out of our apartment and move in with them. And she was a little upset about it because she was just going to live there, and I was going to take her to the hospital in her car, because I didn't have a car, but in her car, and we would have called them so they could have come to the hospital. But they wasn't having that. They wanted her there where she could get to the hospital. I didn't ever understand why he seemed so overbearing, like her dad, because he wasn't her dad. And that's just, he kind of treated her not like an older brother. I have had 4 older brothers, and they never treated me like that. But he was just kind of an overbearing personality. I don't know. He just was. When he said he wanted something, when it came to talking to her, she just didn't argue very much with him. I put up a little bit of I don't really want to do this, whatever. But if he seemed set on it, then she would do it.
JC was Rachel's godfather, and as we know, he and his wife Joan took Rachel in and raised her as their own after Rose was killed. They had no children of their own. Is it possible that JC did not approve of the way single mom Rose was behaving, leaving her daughter with relative strangers while she conducted an affair in a hotel far from home? And that he believed that he and his wife could provide Rachel with a better home than his half-sister and her philandering lover?
For a while, they were investigating my brother, JC, because someone suggested that he would do it so that he could get Rachel.
So what was J.C. Halter's alibi for the night of September 12th? We have the receipt for his overnight stay at a Motel 6 across the state. According to his wife, he was there for work-related reasons. Here is his sister, Margie.
He had a job on the other side of the state. He and his coworkers, he was definitely visible.
DCI notes that we saw reflect that investigators were definitely concerned about confirming JC's alibi. JC Halter died in 2003. His wife Joan spoke with us and told us that she has no idea where the professor on a plane story came from. She was the one, she says, who called JC at the hotel in Iowa and informed him that his sister had been killed.
I called him. He was in a hotel. It was probably 9-10 o'clock at night, I think. And he just dropped the phone and fell down.
She says that investigators looked at JC pretty hard after Rose was killed.
We drove down to Iowa. I think I told you this. And they question him, how it is. They blame it on, they make you almost feel guilty. They asked him all kinds of questions. So he had to come up with hotel, motel receipts, telephone bill, told where all he called that day.
She says JC felt as though he was being treated as a suspect.
Who wouldn't? He was in Iowa, and people would think we wanted Rachel. That would be the motive, but it's definitely not.
Further, she says that she and JC had no idea that Rose was seeing Roger, a married man. If JC did not know about Roger, he had very little motive to murder his sister. She denies that JC was judgmental about the way Rose was raising Rachel.
No, not at all. We all got along so good.
Her husband, she says, would never have wanted to kill or be capable of killing Rose.
I must say he could never do that. Never, ever.
In a situation typical of a brutal crime for which there are no answers, rumors swirled regarding people involved in the case, and JC seems to have been the subject of some of the worst of these. Detective Fisher told us that he heard a rumor that JC was actually Rachel's father. And Tammy Berkman, Rose's friend, told us.
Then I heard that there was things that went on. It wasn't this guy, but her stepbrother. I heard that happened, that her half brother, JC, messed with her, but I didn't hear any of this until after she was gone.
But we feel that the testimonials of Vicky, Margie, and Joan, 3 people close to both JC and Rose, to the loving relationship between the 2 siblings, undercuts those ugly stories created by those desperate to fill the void of information. Now, for some people whom investigators checked out because of their relationship histories with Rose, but who did not, that we know of, know about the trip to the Amana colonies. Frank Pierce, who was a cousin of Rachel's friend and co-worker Susie Moore McCush, was the father of Rose's daughter, Rachel. Rose had Rachel quite young, and Frank, who lived on a Native American reservation in Kansas, was the father. It's unclear what the relationship was between him and Rose, but it appears that it was just a fling. They were never serious. According to Margie, Frank did not take the news that Rose was pregnant well.
Whenever she told him she was pregnant, he went into a rage, evidently. This I know because one of the gals that I worked with at the hospital told me they could hear the argument clear up to their house, which was across the street from the trailer park that she lived in at the time.
Frank denied any connection to the child and had nothing to do with her, according to Rose's friends and family. To their knowledge, he had never even seen her. In 1980, Frank was married and living in Horton, Kansas. Rose told Vicky Ruoff that about 1 year earlier, he had contacted Rose at work and told her that he wanted her and Rachel back. Here is Vicky.
I think he did call her and wanted her back, but she was just done with him. She wanted no part to do with him, and she said no, she wasn't interested.
If there was any more to this, it is not known, but there is an indication that there may have been more contact between the 2. Detective Harold Judd interviewed Betty Jo Burkert, Rose's stepmother, who lived next door to Rose, 2 days after Rose's death. Betty Jo said that Rose told her that 2 to 3 weeks earlier, a car had been sitting parked in the lane next to her house. A man slid down in the seat as she passed by. Rose thought it might be Frank Pierce, but she could not be certain. Rose told her, "I've never been scared before, but I am now." Frank was into drugs, Rose said. The DCI interviewed Frank Pierce and stated in their notes that his statements were consistent with reports from Rose's family that he had no contact with her or their child. The DCI appears to have eliminated Frank from the list of suspects. Another person mentioned in the DCI files for an admittedly tangential connection to Rose was a man named William White. William was the boyfriend of Rose's stepmother, Betty Burkert, after Rose's father, Fred, died in 1978. DCI files describe William as, quote, "a little weird, has attempted suicide in the past and has violent tendencies." It was also learned that he tried to cut himself the weekend prior. His mother, the files indicate, was considering committing him in early 1981. She said that her son had attempted suicide on numerous occasions, at one point by setting himself on fire. DCI Special Agent Gopal learned from the local sheriff in Williams' area that William, who was 20 years younger than Betty Jo, was, quote, a mental case with suicidal tendencies and that he has slashed his wrists on New Year's Eve 1980. We cannot confirm this, but we suspect that William unfortunately did succeed at suicide because he died in the spring of 1981. The coincidental timing of his downward spiral into self-harm with the murders of his girlfriend's stepdaughter was of interest to investigators. But that wasn't William's only connection to the case. William White was an employee of Globe Union, the same battery company that employed Danny B., Rose's violent ex. No doubt, investigators wondered whether the two knew each other and possibly colluded. It does not appear that anything came of this theory, and William White was never concretely connected to anything involving Rose. Then there is another ex of Rose's whom the police looked at. Jack Enox was an ex-cop who had dated Rose a couple of years before she died. He worked in the psychiatric hospital as a security guard that was the same hospital where Rose's sister, Margie Lowry, worked. According to what some of Rose's friends told police after her murder, Rose had been given a ring by Jack, who wanted to marry her. But Margie Lowry told us that Rose and Jack had broken up mutually, and Jack had gone on to marry Rose's friend, Tammy Berkman. Jack was someone who was very likable, but was not able to commit to monogamy. He and Tammy ended up getting divorced. Margie Lowry herself provided an alibi for Jack on the night of the murders. She saw him at the hospital where they both worked. The only reason that Jack Enox received attention from police, given the fact that he and Rose parted amicably, was that police got a tip from a sheriff in Nebraska that someone had given them Jack Enox's name and fingered him for a motel homicide case in Iowa. Investigators ran down this tip and determined that it was not reliable. Jack Enox was not their man. As we have just seen, investigators checked off many of the people on Rose's side of the equation as suspects in her murder. Of course, there was also Roger's side to consider. Since no one knew which half of the couple was the target and which one was collateral damage, they had to consider both. So investigators looked at anyone who Roger could have pissed off by messing around with their wives. One of these was a GTE employee we are calling John H., who had been a good friend of Roger's. That was until Roger had an affair with John's wife, Judy. Judy confirmed the brief affair to DCI investigators. We don't know exactly when this took place, but Judy and John divorced very soon after the murders, with the divorce petition being granted in February of 1981. In October of that year, Judy was living with her father, and John showed up and threatened Judy and her father with a gun. This resulted in assault charges for John, who clearly had violent tendencies. DCI notes on John say vaguely that at the time of the murders, he had no record, but he was known to associate with criminals. Ironically, in 1982, John married a woman named Rose. Presumably, investigators looked into any other men who might have been angered by Roger's interactions with their women. We don't have the records of these angles of the investigation, but it seems pretty far-fetched that some guy, angry over a past transgression of Roger's, would travel all the way up to Iowa to kill Roger rather than just ambushing him somewhere closer to home. There is another person whom police had to look at as a potential suspect in the case, even though it seemed extremely unlikely that she would commit such a brutal and bloody murder of her own husband. Of course, we are talking about Marcella Atkinson. It does not seem that throughout the investigation, authorities seriously considered the idea that a woman had committed this crime. The bloody bludgeoning seemed a very male type of murder. Nonetheless, as the spurned wife whose husband was cheating on her with a younger woman, Marcella certainly had motive. But this motive existed only if there was evidence that Marcella knew that her husband was being unfaithful. Witnesses interviewed over the course of the investigation consistently reported that they did not believe that Marcella knew that Roger was having an affair. And she has consistently said to many people that she had no idea that he was being unfaithful, and to this day it's not clear whether she realized the extent of his infidelities. But there were some things about Marcella's actions and behavior that made some wonder whether she could have more information than she admitted to, or even could have been involved in the murders, albeit remotely. Roger's family tells us that Marcella's behavior was unusual in the days before the murder.
She came to visit, which was unusual because we were not close, but it happened that she came and wanted to talk, and in the end of the conversation, she told me, that she didn't think she would ever see Roger again, and she knew he was for the telephone company working up around Cahokia. We talked, and I can't remember all the conversation, but I very clearly remember her saying, I don't think I will ever see Roger again.
Marcella was emotional in this visit to the Atkinsons, something they describe as unusual. This was strange. Why would Marcella be upset and anticipating not seeing her husband again? This could be because she said she had a wifely sense that something was not right, and that possibly Roger was thinking of leaving her. Rita, Marcella's sister-in-law, told police that Marcella was very upset during the week that Roger was gone because he had only called her once on Tuesday, and she didn't hear from him after that, and she was unable to reach him. Rita also heard that Marcella had told people that she was afraid she wouldn't see Roger again, and that she was desperate to go to Cahokia herself to track down her husband, but she could not because she was babysitting. People wondered whether maybe Marcella figured out that something was up. A clue that Roger was hiding something may have been in Mike H. dropping off Roger's car. When it appeared in the driveway, Marcella may have begun to question how exactly Roger was going to get home when he returned from his work trip. And when she could not reach Roger from Tuesday on, she likely picked up that she was not getting the full story from her husband. As we just heard from Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson, Marcella had come by their house on Friday the 12th and said that she was afraid she would not see Roger again. Marcella says her memory of this whole event is hazy, but that she had just visited that day with the pastor whom Roger had confided in.
I knew something was wrong, but didn't know what.
So she says she read between the lines that there was something going on with Roger and she was upset.
There has to be somebody else because of the way he's acting, because of his comments to me. And so I was putting it all together. So it was all coming together there on that Friday, the 12th.
Desperate to track down her husband, Marcella called Mike H. on the morning of the 13th, Saturday, before it was discovered that Roger was dead. She was trying to find information on where Roger was. We know this from Rita, who answered the phone. Rita told investigators that Marcella had called the house on Saturday morning around 9 or 9:30 and wanted to speak with Mike. She wanted to find out where Roger was staying in Cahokia. Mike told investigators that Marcella wanted to know where Roger was. Clearly, he was not in Cahokia where he had said he was going to be. Marcella told Mike that Roger's car was still in their driveway, and she had not heard from her husband since Tuesday the 9th. This was probably because starting on Wednesday, Rose was with him. But Marcella denied making this call to Mike H.'s home in a later interview. And Mike H. told DCI Special Agent Maurer on September 17th that he had given Marcella no information as to how she could contact Roger. But in one of his later interviews, he said he didn't even speak with her that day. We don't feel that we really know the whole story of what was discussed, if anything, in this conversation between Mike and Marcella, which she told us she does not recall. Marcella also again stopped over at Larry and Elizabeth's home on the morning of Saturday the 13th. This was well before anyone knew Roger was dead. Elizabeth told investigators that they had talked about Roger. Marcella had wanted to know whether Roger had confided in Larry, and she told Elizabeth that Roger had told her that he was unhappy. Elizabeth asked her if she would consider giving Roger a divorce, and Marcella responded that Roger owed it to her to stay with her because they were married. She was upset when she left the house. Marcella tells us that she does not recall this visit, but that she confirmed that it happened by checking with now adult Lisa Black, the little girl she had been babysitting that weekend, who she had brought along with her to see Larry and Elizabeth. Marcella later told Roger's parents in a January 1982 letter that when Roger told her he was leaving for a 2-week job on September 8th, she asked him not to go. She felt that something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. The letter said, quote, "When I asked over the weekend of our 7th anniversary in early September if he was considering divorce, he said, 'I don't know.'" Marcella clearly intuited that something was very wrong. She told the DCI in an interview that she recognized that things were not right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The thrust of Marcella's letter was that she felt Roger's family somehow blamed her for Roger straying outside the marriage. She said that she had sought counseling and felt suicidal after his death, wondering if she could have done something differently. She wrote, quote, "Had he been where he was supposed to have been, he might be here today." She also informed Roger's parents that she was getting remarried. This was just 16 months after her husband's murder. Naturally, Marcella was questioned by police about her whereabouts on the night of September 12th to 13th. Marcella admits that she was fingerprinted and submitted to a polygraph, which she says she passed. Also, she had somewhat of an alibi. She was babysitting the Black children all weekend, staying at their home. It seemed like a stretch that she would leave the kids alone on Friday night and make the 4-hour drive up to the Amanas, track down Roger and Rose, kill them, and return to St. Joseph by the next morning, all without being detected. The timeline she gave investigators showed that she and Lisa Black left to go shopping at the Metro North Shopping Mall in Kansas City on Saturday morning, September 12, 1980, between 8 and 9 a.m. And before that shopping trip, she stopped over at the Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson home. So she would have had to have been back in St. Joseph by this time. In addition, 2 investigators that we spoke to do not believe that Marcella was involved in any way in what happened to Roger and Rose. Here is Detective Fisher.
She was pretty upset about it. And she volunteered and took a polygraph test right off the bat. But I'd rule her out 100%.
And here is Sheriff Rotter.
Roger's wife. She has a great alibi. She's back in Missouri. She's actually babysitting a young girl, and there's no question that she didn't go anywhere.
According to Marcella, police told her that she had been cleared of any involvement in Roger's death.
They suspected me because the first person that they think does something like that is someone close to the person in the family. But I have a very good alibi, and I didn't know he was going to Iowa. I don't know that it took very long to rule me out. Like I said, the key thing that the person had to know that killed them was that they were in Iowa, and that was unknown to me. I was very busy on a babysitting job that the 2 of us had started the weekend before, so I was tied down with being committed to that and not being able to get free and go do something. I didn't know. I had a feeling something was wrong, and I thought there, right before he was killed, I thought that there was really someone else because of talking to the minister that he had confided in. But that was not an absolute fact because he didn't tell me for sure. He just didn't answer my question, but yet he did in my mind. So I wasn't sure about that. So being tied down on a babysitting job and not knowing that he was somewhere else and not knowing she was with him, I did not know that she had gone to be with him until after the fact. So there was a lot of things that helped to rule me out pretty quickly. I'm not saying it didn't upset me. It made me very angry, made me feel betrayed, but not mad enough or upset enough to take the life of 2 people. And besides, the way I look at it, their lives were not worth me doing something to them in order for me to spend the rest of my life paying for it.
Frustrated that she was not receiving any answers from law enforcement, Marcella hired a PI named Harold Martin to try to get to the bottom of who killed her husband. She told a reporter that Martin had not made much headway in figuring out who was responsible for the Amana murders. He did confirm to Marcella that indeed Roger had been seeing Rose Burkert since June of that year, when he had repaired a telephone line at her home. Here is Marcella.
I didn't know at the time how long that had been going on. They didn't answer that question. I don't know if they could or just wouldn't. So that's one reason why I hired a private investigator, because they wouldn't answer a lot of my questions. And I wanted to know, how long has this been going on? Yes, he told me that it had been going on since apparently when Roger installed her phone or did something to her phone back in June. So that had been apparently going on all summer, and that accounts for why he was acting so strange all summer.
So now we have a suspicious wife who was either aware that her husband was straying or was at the very least aware that her husband might want to leave her, who exhibited some unusual behavior before her husband's murder. Was this motive enough to have killed him? If not, there was more. Again, here is Marcella.
I would not have hired someone to do it. For one thing, I didn't have the monetary capability of doing it. And I would not have put someone like my dad up to it and then endangering them having to spend the rest of their life put away and not have their freedom. So that's just not me.
But after Roger's death, Marcella collected on the double indemnity life insurance policy that she held on Roger. A double indemnity policy is one that pays double the face value of the contract under certain circumstances surrounding the death of the insured, which usually include murder. Marcella also filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Holiday Inns, Inc. in September 1982, citing poor security and claiming that the hotel had failed to provide reasonably safe security for its guests, which had resulted in her husband's death. Here is Marcella.
One of the reasons why I brought the lawsuit against the Holiday Inn is I felt that they were lax in their protection of the people that were in their motel. And I felt like that should never happen ever to anybody again. So it was the principle of the thing to make a statement and make a point. It did not go to court. We settled out of court. And yes, I think it was a reasonable settlement. And the main thing I think that was the catch to the whole thing, but I'm not sure since we didn't go to court, was that I don't think that the locking system was real adequate. And back then, they had a different locking system on their doors than what they do now. An employee could have had a master key.
The suit was settled out of court, meaning that Marcella was paid an undisclosed amount to drop the lawsuit. In her court filings in connection with the civil liability suit against Holiday Inn, it was revealed that as a result of Roger's death, Marcella had received life insurance payments totaling $140,000, about $469,000 in 2020 dollars. This alone was enough to raise eyebrows about whether Marcella could have had a financial incentive to get rid of Roger. As Margie Lowry, Rose's sister, sees it.
Only one who profited from her husband's death. If we earned any money from wrongful death, that we would put it in a trust for Rachel, because she's the one that lost the most.
Marcella has been very open about her feelings of hurt and betrayal at Roger's actions, and she has spent 40 years deflecting blame. Here she is.
I thought that he was probably wanting a child as badly as I did. We had been trying for some time. I had been through fertility treatments and different things like that, trying to get pregnant. As a matter of fact, I kept a record on a calendar that I still have that year. And up until about 2 weeks before he was killed, I was still on fertility medication to try to get pregnant. And we also had applied for adoption to see, whichever one worked first, fine. So I was misled. To me, I was misled by him that I was still taking fertility medication, and yet he's out there messing around with other women. And I'm thinking, well, if you weren't giving it away to other women, maybe I would have gotten pregnant, you know? I mean, I know that sounds odd, but so I'm on fertility medication, still trying to get pregnant, and he's out messing around. He's having apparently a pretty good affair. So I hope that tells you something, that I was still unaware of what was going on.
Marcella said that she has come to different conclusions about the identity of the murderer over the years. In one interview, she told the DCI that she believes that someone from Rose's past was responsible. This was J.C. Halter.
I had heard that her brother, and I believe he was a half-brother or step-brother, I'm not sure which it was, but a brother that lived in another state, traveled in his business, and he was in Iowa, not too far from where it happened at the time the murders occurred.
And in a different interview, she said she suspects that someone in the telephone company was responsible for Roger's death. This remains a strong possibility in her mind. Marcella tells us,
when I've looked at the things, the criteria of what people had to know in order to have committed the murder, several of the things that they needed to know was, where was Roger that week? Because normally you would think a person would be at his home base working. And so all of those men knew that he was gone that week and where he was at. I understand that they knew his plans were to go to Amana over the weekend. I understood that they knew that Rose was with him from Wednesday on. So those kind of things, knowing that they knew that those things, and a lot of us didn't know that, those are key things that would have had to have been known in order to have been able to have committed the murders. My top suspicion is somebody in the GTE phone company, anywhere from supervisor on down to regular workers. I don't know that I should mention any names, but there's 2 or 3 that were working in the phone company at the time that I think could have some motive, could possibly have done it.
Either way, she remains perplexed about how it all went down.
You wonder what could have tripped somebody's trigger to do something like that.
While Marcella may have been cleared by law enforcement, she was not cleared in the minds of Roger's family. They still view her with suspicion. Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson believe that Marcella's actions in the week before the murder show that she was feeling remorse about what was about to go down. Even if she was not personally responsible for killing Roger, she is not the one who actually wielded the weapon. She might nevertheless be morally culpable. Perhaps, they believe, the person who killed Roger did so on Marcella's behalf, whether she knew it or not. And this person would have been someone close to her, someone who would possibly avenge his daughter's rejection by her husband. We are talking about Marcella's father, Floyd Hatcher. This concludes episode 6. Please join us next week as we look into Floyd Hatcher's possible involvement in the case, as well as another person who was a potential suspect in the eyes of the media. If you have any information about the murders of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert, please contact the Iowa County Sheriff's Office at 319-642-7307. Scene of the Crime is a production of AbJack Entertainment. It's narrated by me, Jamie Rice, and co-produced by Jessica Betancourt, Gray Hughes, and Mike Morford. It's written by Jessica Betancourt. Special thanks goes out to the family members and friends of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert who participated in this podcast. Thanks also goes out to Sheriff Rob Rotter and the Iowa County Sheriff's Department, Paul Holes, Ron Fisher, Tim Trishman, and Ida Block. If you'd like to help Scene of the Crime reach new listeners, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please recommend this podcast to your friends. You can find Scene of the Crime on Twitter at Scene of Crime Pod and on Facebook.